Captain Lyra Voss stood at the edge of the observation deck, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. Before her the stars shined like cold diamonds in the black void, a sight she had seen countless times, but tonight it felt different tonight. Everything felt different. Lyra had just finished a tense meeting with the Aetherian delegation. Their first contact with humanity had been nothing like the grand speeches and visions she had expected. This was real, raw, and urgent. The Aetherians were a race of immense intelligence. Their long lives and advanced technology spoke of a civilization that had once soared through the stars, yet their planet now lay in ruin. Their cities were in decay, their people scattered across distant colonies, struggling to survive after centuries of war. They had come to humanity seeking aid. Lyra had hoped to help them from the start, but even she had no idea how deep their desperation ran. Elthera, the leader of the Aetherian people, was an imposing figure, tall and regal with eyes that held the weight of generations. Her voice trembled only once during the meeting, when she spoke of their homeworld Aetheria and the empire that had claimed it. The Vrothi, a brutal alien species that had conquered entire star systems and now turned their eyes on the Aetherian heartworld. Lyra had watched Elthera's eyes as she made her plea. The Aetherians were not weak, their resolve was strong, but they had been outmatched for far too long. They needed more than just assistance, they needed a miracle. Lyra had never believed in miracles, but she believed in people. She had seen what humans could do when they came together, when they fought for something bigger than themselves. And in that moment, standing in front of a leader who had seen her people brought to the brink of extinction, Lyra made a decision that would change everything. "I promise you we will return with help." Lyra had said the words before she even had a chance to think them through. She knew it would not be easy. She knew her own government might balk at the idea, but she could not let the Aetherians down. They had trusted her, and she would not break that trust, not after everything they had been through. The journey would not be simple. The distance between Earth and Aetheria was vast, a journey that would take months, perhaps even years, and they were not prepared for a war. But Lyra believed in the human spirit, in their ingenuity, their drive to survive and thrive. She knew that they would rise to the challenge, and for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a surge of hope deep inside her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. This was the reason she had joined the fleet all those years ago, to make a difference in a universe that so often seemed indifferent. But back on Earth, not everyone shared her enthusiasm. The government saw the Aetherian request as a burden and unnecessary risk. The war was over as far as they were concerned. The resources were already stretched thin with the rebuilding efforts after years of conflict with other powers. There were voices calling for caution, voices suggesting that the human race should focus on its own survival, not the survival of another species. Yet Lyra knew she could not simply walk away. She had made a promise, and the humans were nothing if not a people who kept their word. The council meetings were tense. Lyra found herself fighting for every inch of support to gather a fleet strong enough to reach Aetheria and bring back a glimmer of hope for the Aetherians. Some of her closest allies stood with her, but even they hesitated. They questioned whether the cost would be worth it, whether the promise she had made was one that humanity could truly afford to keep. Lyra pushed on, regardless, her mind clear, her heart certain that she could not turn her back on this people who had given her a chance to make a difference. The council chamber was filled with murmurs as Lyra stepped inside, the weight of the room's gaze pressing on her shoulders like 1,000 unseen hands. She had spent days preparing for this moment, but she knew the arguments would not be easy. The promise she had made was hanging like a sword above her, and no one in the room was more aware of its cost than she was. The room was cold and sterile, just like the decision she knew would come. Lyra's eyes briefly scanned the faces of the council members seated before her. Most were hardened politicians who had spent their careers calculating risks and balancing interests. They looked at her not as a person who had made a promise, but as a symbol of something far bigger, something they could either support or reject with a few simple words, one way or another. Lyra understood that this would be the defining moment of her career. She had already risked everything on a dream. Now the reality of that risk was staring her in the face. Admiral Klein was the first to speak. His voice was gruff, and his eyes were hard with the same practicality that had seen him lead Earth's military through years of turmoil. His arms were crossed tightly, as if warding off any hope of optimism in the room. "Captain Voss," he began, his tone clipped, "you are asking us to send an entire fleet across the galaxy to aid an alien species on a world we've never even seen. We don't have the resources for this. We can't afford another war, not when we're barely holding on to peace as it is." Lyra didn't flinch, though the weight of his words hit her. She had anticipated this opposition. She had prepared for it. "I understand your concerns, Admiral," she replied, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about resources or strategy. This is about something far more important. It's about the very foundation of who we are as a species." A murmur rippled through the room at her words, but Lyra pressed on, her voice unwavering. "We promised the Aetherians we would help them restore their homeworld. They trusted us with their lives and their future. We cannot turn our backs on them. Not now, not when they have nothing left to lose." There was silence after her words, and Lyra could feel the tension in the room thickening. The council was listening, but they were not yet convinced. She could see their hesitation, their unwillingness to commit to what they knew would be a dangerous and costly mission. It was then that Counselor Juno spoke up, her voice smooth yet filled with authority. "Captain Voss, you speak of promises and values, but we must be pragmatic here. Humanity cannot afford to sacrifice its future for the sake of an alien world. We have seen what happens when we overextend ourselves. You're asking us to risk everything for a cause that may very well fail." Lyra's pulse quickened, but she didn't let her emotions show. Instead, she took a deep breath, centering herself before responding. "I understand the cost, I do," she said, locking eyes with the counselor. "But I also know what it means to honor a promise made. I've seen the potential of humanity not just in war, but in moments like this when we choose to do what is right instead of what is easy." The room was still, and for a moment, Lyra thought she had failed. She saw only skepticism in their eyes. But then Counselor Vance, a middle-aged man who had been silent until now, leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "What exactly do you need, Captain?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone in his position. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. This was the opening she had been waiting for. She knew that the council was starting to listen. She straightened, ready to outline her plan, knowing that this was the moment that would decide everything. "I need the fleet's full support," she said clearly, "and a commitment to bring back everything we have to offer. Resources, personnel, weapons, everything. And we need it now before the Aetherians are completely wiped out." The room fell silent once more as the council members exchanged glances. The decision was not an easy one, and Lyra could see the strain it caused them. But in that moment, she knew the decision was no longer hers to make. It belonged to humanity as a whole. The council's approval, though hard-won, was only the first step. Now, the real work began. Lyra stood in the hangar bay, overseeing the assembly of the fleet, a task that felt both exhilarating and daunting. The vast expanse of space had always been humanity's frontier, but now it was the battleground for an uncertain future. Ships of all sizes lined the bay. Massive warships, smaller reconnaissance vessels, and supply carriers. Each one represented a piece of a larger puzzle, and it was Lyra's responsibility to make sure it all fit together. Her team was already at work, strategizing, organizing, and finalizing the logistics. But as the fleet took shape, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle over her. The mission was far from certain. The distance between Earth and Aetheria was more than a simple stretch of space. It was an abyss of uncertainty, a journey that could take months or even years depending on what they encountered along the way. Even if they managed to get there, there was no guarantee they would be able to defeat the Vrothi. But the promise had been made, and Lyra wasn't about to let doubt stop her. She pushed forward, focusing on what needed to be done. The first thing Lyra needed was to assemble a crew, a team that would become her family in the stars. She walked through the corridors of the fleet's main command ship, speaking with officers, engineers, and soldiers. She sought out those who weren't just skilled, but passionate about the mission, those who would follow her not because of duty, but because they too believed in something greater. One of the first to volunteer was Commander Iden Cole, a battle-hardened veteran with a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor. He had fought in the war against the Xanth Union years ago, and though he had sworn he'd never step onto a battlefield again, something about Lyra's unwavering conviction spoke to him. He believed, deep down, that humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't just about survival. It was about making a difference. He joined her team with a promise. "I'll follow you anywhere, Lyra. Just don't get us killed." Next was Dr. Kira Sandoval, an astrobiologist who had spent years researching alien life forms, but had never ventured beyond Earth's orbit. Her curiosity about the Aetherians was only matched by her dedication to finding solutions. Lyra knew her expertise would be invaluable, especially when it came to navigating alien ecosystems and understanding the unique biology of the Aetherians. Kira was quiet at first, always observing, always thinking. But Lyra saw the fire in her eyes, a fire that matched her own. The engineering team was led by Julian Cross, a brilliant yet eccentric inventor who had developed some of the most advanced propulsion systems used by the fleet. Julian's expertise in ship modifications and resource management was crucial to keeping the fleet running smoothly. His ability to think outside the box was invaluable, and more than once, Lyra had seen him come up with solutions to problems that seemed impossible. But it wasn't just the officers and scientists that Lyra sought. She also needed the heart and soul of the mission, the soldiers. These were the men and women who would fight and risk their lives alongside the Aetherians. They weren't just part of the military machine. They were human, just like everyone else on board, with families, dreams, and fears of their own. Among them was Sergeant Elena Rivera, a fierce and loyal soldier who had served in countless conflict zones. Her loyalty to Lyra was unwavering, and her skill in combat was legendary. As the days passed and the fleet slowly took shape, Lyra began to feel the weight of her responsibility like never before. Each person who joined the mission was another life placed on the line, another hope pinned to a promise she wasn't sure they could keep. Yet there was no turning back. This was their only chance to honor the Aetherians' trust and prove humanity's place among the stars. She had already promised. Now it was time to deliver. The final preparations were underway, and the fleet was ready to depart. Lyra stood on the bridge of her command ship, looking out at the vast expanse of space. The stars beckoned, distant and cold. There was no turning back now. The fleet's engines roared to life, and the ships began to break orbit, their destination set, their mission clear. As they sailed into the unknown, Lyra's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew the road ahead would be filled with dangers, and that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a foe they barely understood. But she also knew one thing for sure: humanity would not break its promise. Not now. Not ever. The journey through the void was far from peaceful. The farther they traveled, the more Lyra felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her. Earth felt like a distant memory now, a faint whisper lost in the infinite stretch of stars. As the fleet navigated through uncharted territories, they encountered strange cosmic phenomena. Stellar anomalies, electromagnetic storms, and rogue asteroids that tested their resolve and their ship's capabilities. Yet it wasn't the physical dangers of space that unsettled Lyra most. It was the growing unease among her crew. The unknowns of this mission weren't just about space. They were about the people they were going to help and the enemy they had yet to face. The message from Elthira, sent months ago, had spoken of the Vrothi's ruthlessness, but it had not prepared Lyra for the quiet dread that settled over her as they approached the Aetherian system. The fleet was at its highest readiness, and everyone on board was aware of the gravity of their task, but that didn't erase the gnawing feeling that they were walking into a trap. Dr. Kira Sandoval had spent hours analyzing the data from Elthira's message. The Vrothi aren't just invaders. Kira had explained to Lyra during one of their long conversations in the ship's command lounge. They're predators. They don't just conquer worlds, they devour them. We're not dealing with a typical military force. They erase entire civilizations from the map, leaving only ashes behind. Lyra had no doubt about the truth of Kira's words, but she couldn't allow herself to dwell on fear. Not yet. The fleet was almost at the edge of the Aetherian system. Their first move was to establish communication with El-Thera and gather intelligence about the Vrothi's forces, but something felt wrong. Their arrival went unnoticed at first. The Aetherian system appeared deserted. Empty cities on Aetheria's moons, abandoned space stations, a stark contrast to the thriving, vibrant world Lyra had imagined from El-Thera's stories. It wasn't until they reached the outskirts of Aetheria's orbit that they found the first signs of trouble. A small scout ship from the fleet detected a faint signal, a distress beacon hidden within the debris field around Aetheria's outer rim. It wasn't much, just a broken transmission, fragmented and incomplete, but it was enough to confirm their worst fear. El-Thera's people had not been idle. They were still fighting, but the battle was now being fought in the shadows. "We're too late," Lyra murmured to herself as the transmission was pieced together, revealing the grim reality. The Vrothi had already launched a secondary strike on Aetheria. Their advanced ships were hunting down any survivors, eliminating those who dared to resist. The Aetherians were scattered, fighting to hold on to the last vestiges of their home. "Captain," Commander Cole's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got company. Several unidentified ships are closing in on our position. They're Vrothi. No doubt about it." Lyra's heart raced. "All hands to battle stations. Prepare for combat. We won't let them take Aetheria without a fight." In an instant, the mood aboard the fleet shifted. The uncertainty of their mission had now turned into an undeniable truth. The battle for Aetheria had already begun. But they were not just allies to the Aetherians anymore. They were the first line of defense. They would be the spark that ignited a rebellion. As the human ships powered up their weapons and the crew scrambled to their posts, Lyra couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. There was no turning back now. Their promise had brought them here, and it would be their courage and ingenuity that would see them through. The Vrothi ships emerged from the debris, sleek and deadly, their black hulls gleaming with malice. Lyra watched as the fleet engaged, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space in a spectacular flash of firepower. Her eyes never left the battlefield as the ships danced among the stars, exchanging laser fire in a deadly ballet. The Vrothi may have been more numerous, but the humans had something the Vrothi didn't: unity. The fleet moved as one, each ship working in perfect synchronization. The Aetherians, though battered, had joined the fray as well, their forces bolstered by the humans' unexpected support. It wasn't an easy battle. The Vrothi were relentless, and their tactics were cruel and effective. But as the first Vrothi ships fell, something changed. The Aetherians found their courage, their spirit reigniting in the heat of battle. The tide was turning. For the first time since arriving in the Aetherian system, Lyra allowed herself a brief moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't too late after all. The battle continued to rage in the silent depths of space, an unrelenting tide of lasers and explosions. The Vrothi ships had made their presence known in full force, but the human fleet and Aetherian forces, though outnumbered, fought with a tenacity that surprised even Lyra. Each ship, each crew member, fought as though their survival depended not just on the mission, but on the future of an entire civilization. But as the first wave of the Vrothi was repelled, it became clear that this was only the beginning. The Vrothi were a relentless force, and they would stop at nothing to crush any hope of resistance. Aboard the command ship, Lyra stood at the center of the operations room, her eyes fixed on the tactical screen. The Aetherians were doing their best to hold their ground, but the weight of the Vrothi's superior numbers and firepower was starting to show. She couldn't let them give in. Not now. Not when they were so close to victory. The Aetherians had suffered for so long, but they weren't broken yet. She could feel it, even through the chaos of battle. There was still hope, but it was fragile. "Captain," "We've received a message from Thera." Kira's voice came over the comm, snapping Lyra out of her thoughts. The scientist had been working tirelessly with the Aetherians to decipher any weak points in the Vrothi's technology, searching for any advantage they could exploit. "She says they're ready to launch a full-scale counterattack. They've regrouped some of their forces on the surface of Aetheria." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment. The Aetherians had found their courage again. They were ready to fight back. "Tell Thera to move forward," Lyra ordered, her voice filled with renewed determination. "We're with them. All ships, break formation and prepare for a coordinated strike. We're going to give them the opening they need." As the orders were relayed, the fleet began to shift, breaking from its defensive position to create a more aggressive stance. The Vrothi weren't expecting this. The human fleet, though smaller, had proven to be a difficult enemy. But now, with the Aetherians joining the fight fully, the Vrothi realized that they were no longer facing a fractured, weakened force. They were facing a unified front. The spark of resistance was no longer just an idea. It was a reality. The battle intensified. But this time, the humans and Aetherians fought together with a shared purpose. Ships moved as one, the human and Aetherian forces weaving between each other with astonishing coordination. Lyra could see it on the tactical screen. The Vrothi were faltering. The Aetherian ships, once hesitant and broken, now fought with a newfound strength, their weapons firing with precision. They had found their voice in the chaos, their strength in unity. "We've got them on the run," Commander Cole's voice came through, his tone laced with something Lyra hadn't heard from him before: hope. "The Vrothi are retreating." Lyra's pulse quickened. They had done it. But even as victory seemed within reach, she knew this battle was far from over. The Vrothi would regroup. They would return, and they would be even more determined to wipe out any resistance. But for now, Lyra allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The tide had turned. The human and Aetherian forces had given the Vrothi a fight they hadn't expected. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, Lyra saw a glimmer of what might be possible, a future where the Aetherians could reclaim their homeworld, a future where humanity had proven its worth across the stars. "Captain, we've got a new problem." Cole's voice cut through the euphoria, his tone now urgent. "A fleet of Vrothi reinforcements has just entered the system, and they're bringing something new with them." Lyra's heart sank as she scanned the updated data on the tactical screen. The new ships were massive, even larger than the ones they had already fought. Whatever the Vrothi were bringing, it wasn't just an army, it was a statement. The war was far from over. The Vrothi hadn't given up, and they weren't going to back down. Lyra's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, her mind racing as she calculated their next move. The Aetherians had already taken so much damage, and now the reinforcements were threatening to overwhelm them. She couldn't let it end here. Not after everything they had sacrificed, not after they had come so far. "We fight on," Lyra said, her voice hard with resolve. "Prepare the fleet. We're not backing down now. We've got one shot at this, and we're going to make it count." As the battle raged on, Lyra knew one thing for certain. The spark of resistance had been lit, and no matter how dark the night ahead, it would never be extinguished. The Vrothi reinforcements were overwhelming. Massive warships with weapons capable of shattering entire fleets. The first wave of their reinforcements had arrived in full force, and Lyra knew that the battle had shifted from a fight for survival to a fight for hope. The Aetherian forces, though emboldened by their earlier victories, were still recovering from the devastation they had endured. The human fleet, though battle-ready, had taken heavy losses. The gap in firepower between them and the Vrothi was growing, and there was no denying the enemy's sheer size and strength. Lyra stood in the command center, her gaze fixed on the tactical display as the new Vrothi ships loomed on the screen like dark behemoths. These ships were unlike any they had faced before, gigantic, heavily armored, and armed with weapons that outmatched anything the human fleet had in its arsenal. The Vrathi had come prepared to finish what they started. The Etherians had no hope of defending their homeworld without help, and the human fleet was now their only lifeline. "We can't hold them off for much longer, Captain." Commander Cole's voice broke through her thoughts, his expression grim. "These ships are built to withstand everything we've got. Even if we throw everything at them, it might not be enough." Lyra's mind raced. If they didn't come up with something fast, Aetheria would fall, and the resistance would be snuffed out before it could ever fully ignite. Yet, as she scanned the battlefield, something caught her attention. One of the Vrathi ships, the largest, seemed to be giving off an unusual signal. It wasn't the typical transmission they had intercepted earlier. This was something different, something deliberately hidden in plain sight. "Kira, take a look at this," Lyra said, gesturing to the signal. "Does that look intentional to you?" Dr. Kira Sandoval leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the data. "It's encrypted, but I can crack it. This might be a communication channel, but it's not a normal one. It's coming from the Vrathi flagship." She tapped furiously at her console. "Give me a moment." Lyra held her breath as Kira worked. Every second counted. The Vrathi were closing in, and their weapons were charging for another devastating strike. A blow like that would break the fleet. Yet, if Kira could decrypt the message, it might reveal a weakness they could exploit. "There," Kira exclaimed, her fingers dancing across the keys. "It's a command structure. A pattern. This flagship is directing the entire Vrathi force. If we take it out, it'll destabilize their entire command chain." Lyra's eyes hardened. This was it, the key to everything. If they could strike at the heart of the Vrathi forces, they could disrupt the enemy's entire strategy and give the Aetherians the fighting chance they desperately needed. But getting to that flagship would be no small feat. The Vrathi had surrounded it with an impenetrable defense perimeter, and every ship in their fleet was linked to its command. "We have to take it down," Lyra said, her voice steely with resolve. "Cole, I need a plan to get a strike force inside their perimeter. We don't have much time before they launch another wave. Kira, can you help us hack into their systems once we're in range?" "I can do more than that," Kira replied, her fingers flying over her console. "If we get close enough, I can infect their command network with a virus. It'll disrupt their communications, scramble their weapons, and leave their fleet vulnerable. But we'll need to be fast. One wrong move, and we'll be sitting ducks." Cole nodded, already formulating a strategy. "I've got the team ready. We'll need to deploy a small squadron of stealth ships to slip past their defenses. Once we're in, we'll give you the opening you need, Kira. After that, it's a race to take down that flagship before they can retaliate." Lyra felt the adrenaline surging through her veins. This was a desperate move, but it was their best shot. The Vrathi weren't invincible. They were powerful, but they weren't unstoppable. And Lyra knew that humanity, with all its flaws and imperfections, had a resilience the Vrathi couldn't comprehend. This would be their greatest test yet, and they would not fail. "All right," Lyra said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We're going in. Full speed ahead." The fleet adjusted its formation, preparing to launch the daring strike. Stealth ships detached from the main fleet, their engines dimmed to avoid detection. Lyra's heart pounded as she watched them slip into the enemy perimeter, their trajectory aimed straight at the Vrathi flagship. The rest of the fleet stayed back, ready to provide backup when the time came. In the silence of space, Lyra knew this would either be the beginning of the end for the Vrathi, or the final chapter of humanity's dream to honor their promise to the Aetherians. There was no turning back now. The stealth ships moved like shadows in the vast emptiness of space, slipping through the Vrathi defenses with precise calculations and careful maneuvering. Lyra watched from the bridge of her command ship, her heart pounding in her chest. Every moment felt like an eternity. The Vrathi flagship loomed ahead, massive and foreboding, its weapons bristling, ready to wipe out anything that dared to approach. The human fleet remained in position, staying out of the Vrothi's line of sight, waiting for the signal to engage. Lyra knew that once the stealth ships were in position, they would have only one shot at this. There would be no second chances. "Kira, we're in range," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with tension. "We need that virus active now." "I'm working on it," Kira replied, her hands moving rapidly across her console. The small delay felt like an eternity as Lyra watched the Vrothi ships maneuver, closing in on their targets. The time to act was now. "Stealth Squadron, report." Commander Cole's voice crackled over the comms. "We're in position, ready to execute on your command, Captain." Lyra exhaled sharply. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing on her, every life that hung in the balance. If they failed here, Etheria would fall, and their promise to the Aetherians would be nothing more than empty words. "Do it," Lyra ordered, her voice cold with resolve. "Now." With that, the stealth ships moved in, closing the distance to the Vrothi flagship's perimeter. They were in the blind spot, invisible to the Vrothi sensors. Each ship was equipped with small but powerful explosive charges that, once delivered, would create enough of a distraction to allow Kira to infiltrate the Vrothi's command network. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. The explosive charges detonated simultaneously, sending ripples of energy through the Vrothi flagship's defensive grid. The Vrothi responded instantly, their ships shifting into combat mode, their weapons coming online with deadly intent. The human ships, lying in wait, immediately unleashed a barrage of fire at the Vrothi lines. The battle was now fully underway, a furious clash of firepower, strategy, and sheer will. "Kira, you're up," Lyra said, her voice a sharp command. The moment had arrived. "Almost there," Kira replied, her voice filled with concentration. "I'm in. I've bypassed their primary defense network, uploading the virus now. It should scramble their communications and weapon systems." The minutes ticked by as Lyra watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. The human fleet was holding its ground, but the Vrothi were relentless, pushing back with every ounce of force they could muster. The situation was dire. But Lyra trusted Kira. She trusted her team. They had one chance to turn the tide. Then, it happened. A surge of energy rippled across the Vrothi flagship's hull. Their weapons fired in disarray, missing their intended targets as their systems flickered and scrambled. The Vrothi ships, caught off guard, began to slow, their communication lines severed, their weapons disabled. "It's working." Kira's voice rang out, tinged with exhilaration. "Their systems are in chaos. They can't coordinate anymore." Lyra's heart soared with hope. The Vrothi flagship had lost its command network. Without it, their fleet was in disarray. But the fight was far from over. The Vrothi were still dangerous, and their numbers were overwhelming. Lyra knew they needed to strike fast, before the enemy could recover. "Cole, now's the time," Lyra barked. "Move in with the main fleet. We're taking down the flagship." "Understood, Captain," Commander Cole replied. "All ships, full power to engines. We're going in." The human fleet surged forward, pushing into the heart of the Vrothi formation. As they closed in on the flagship, Lyra's pulse quickened. She could see the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. The Vrothi ships, once coordinated and deadly, were now a disjointed mess. The human ships, along with the Aetherian forces, took advantage of the opening, tearing through the Vrothi lines with devastating precision. As the flagship came into view, Lyra knew there was no time to waste. They had to make the final strike, before the Vrothi could recover or retaliate. Her fingers gripped the console, her eyes locked on the target. "All ships, focus fire on the Vrothi flagship. This ends now." The entire human fleet unleashed a devastating barrage, their weapons ripping through the weakened Vrothi flagship's defenses. The once imposing vessel staggered under the onslaught, its shields collapsing, its weapons failing. The flagship shuddered violently as its core reactor ignited, a blinding explosion tearing through its hull. Lyra watched as the flagship, the heart of the Vrathi fleet, disintegrated in a flash of light. The remaining Vrathi ships, disoriented and leaderless, began to retreat, their lines collapsing under the weight of the human and Aetherian forces. But even as the Vrathi flagship exploded, Lyra knew this victory was only the beginning. There was still much to do, and the war was far from over. Yet, as the fleet's weapons fell silent, Lyra allowed herself a brief moment of triumph. They had struck at the heart of the enemy. And for the first time since arriving in the Aetherian system, Lyra believed they might actually win this war. The spark of resistance had grown into a fire. The debris from the Vrathi flagship floated like shattered fragments of a nightmare, drifting silently through the void. The battle had shifted, and Lyra stood at the helm of the human fleet, watching the remaining Vrathi ships scatter into the deep reaches of space, their retreat a symbol of their unraveling. The enemy, once so confident in their dominance, had faltered. The resistance had won the day. But the victory, while sweet, was not without cost. The human fleet had suffered losses, ships, soldiers, and too many lives that would never return. The Aetherians had fought with a bravery that Lyra would never forget, but they too had paid a heavy price. Even now, the surviving Aetherian ships were regrouping, tending to their wounded and beginning to rebuild their broken fleet. "Captain," Commander Cole's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood beside her, his face smeared with the dust of battle, but his eyes were alight with something more. "We did it. The Vrathi are gone. For now, at least." Lyra nodded, but her eyes never left the view of space before them. The Aetherian system, though scared and battered, was still their home. Their mission wasn't just to defeat the Vrathi. It was to ensure the survival of the Aetherian people, to honor the promise made long ago, and to show the galaxy that humanity was not just a passing species among the stars. They were a force to be reckoned with. "We've only won a battle, not the war," Lyra replied quietly, though the weight of her words was softened by the relief that began to settle in her chest. "The Vrathi won't stay down for long. They'll regroup. We'll need to be ready." "We will be," Cole assured her. "But right now, we have a victory to celebrate." Lyra allowed herself a brief smile, then turned her attention back to the tactical display. The Vrathi flagship was destroyed, but the system was still filled with debris and scattered wreckage. The battle may have been won, but the true test was yet to come. The Aetherians were still rebuilding, and humanity's role in their future was just beginning to take shape. "Commander, I want a full scan of the system," Lyra ordered. "We need to know the full extent of the damage. Once we've assessed it, we can begin the recovery process. There's still much to do." "Aye, Captain," Cole replied, already moving to relay the orders. Lyra walked across the bridge, her mind racing with plans for the next phase. But in the back of her mind, one thought kept rising above the others. The Aetherians had stood with humanity in this fight, not just as allies, but as equals. They had fought side by side, shared the same dangers, and now shared the same future. This alliance, forged in the fires of war, was no longer just a military strategy. It was a bond that could change the entire galaxy. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Elthera." Kira's voice interrupted her thoughts. "She requests to speak with you personally." Lyra turned, her curiosity piqued. Elthera had been their most vocal leader during the battle, guiding the Aetherian forces and sharing vital intelligence. Lyra's connection with the Aetherians had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated, and she had come to respect Elthera as more than just an ally. She was a symbol of the resilience they all shared. "Patch it through," Lyra said. Elthera's face appeared on the screen, her eyes somber but filled with gratitude. "Captain Lyra, you and your crew have done more than fight for us. You have given us hope, something we had almost lost. The Vrathi may be gone, but the scars of their invasion remain. We will need your help to heal, to rebuild, and to ensure that this galaxy does not forget what happened here today." Lyra met her gaze, her heart swelling with pride. "We'll be here for as long as you need us. Elthira, the promise we made to you wasn't just words, it's a commitment. Humanity stands with you. Together, we'll rebuild this world and make sure the Vrothi never return." Elthira nodded, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "This is only the beginning, Captain. The war may be over, but the peace we now forge will last only as long as we stand united. Our alliance is not just for survival, but for something greater. A new future where we and the humans can walk side by side." Lyra's eyes met Elthira's, and in that moment she understood. They had come to Aetheria to honor a promise, but in doing so, they had forged something far more important: an alliance, a future. As the fleet began its slow journey toward recovery and reconstruction, Lyra knew one thing for certain. The stars no longer felt so cold and distant. Together, humanity and the Aetherians had crossed them, and together they would face whatever challenges awaited them in the vast unknown. A new dawn was breaking across the Aetherian system. And this time, it wasn't just a battle being won, it was a future being forged.